Today I wanted to make a video about my thoughts on politics, just because that's a very hot button issue, and I think it's an interesting one as well. And I'll preface this by saying if you disagree with me, that's totally fine. But while I think that we all should have a position, we should all think about things, and we should reach a conclusion, I don't think that we should all agree. I don't think that we should all reach the same conclusion at the end of the day. And the truth of the matter is that's a sort of a hard thing to get your head around, because on one hand, you should have an opinion, you should have a position in life, but that doesn't mean that it would be a good thing if that position that you take was the only dominant position in existence. So it's totally possible to say I take this position, and I also think other people should have the opposite perspective. It's kind of like a male and female thing, right? Should we want a world where there's all men or all women? Like, that just wouldn't be a good balanced situation. So if you're a guy, you're going to have a guy's perspective probably, and if you're a woman, you're going to have a more female perspective on life. And that doesn't mean that you should change your perspective, but it's also true that both need to exist. So with politics is kind of a necessary evil, especially if you're going to have a representative government where people have a voice. You have to have the opportunity for people to express different perspectives. But the first thing that really comes to mind is that we are really good at getting into the personalities, getting into the media pitches, and all of the things that make us feel like we know who a candidate is. So you look at a video, you see what they said, but you really pay attention to their body language. You pay attention to their verbiage. You pay attention to how they look. You pay attention to whether they seem to have a sense of humor, whether you like the way they present themselves. So politics tends to be a popularity contest a lot more than it is a true study of the facts. Now imagine if we were to go back to the simple graphical text adventures of the late 80s in computing, when you would play a game and it really was just reading a lot of text. There was no graphics, there was nothing there except you reading text and then entering commands into the computer. Gaming was different at that time, vastly different, because it was at a stage where it almost wasn't really a game. It was more like an interactive storybook. It was all reading and typing and no graphics. So to go back to the political conversation, what if that's how politics was? What if our political scene didn't have any people with personalities? You couldn't see whether you liked a candidate better than another one. You couldn't judge them on a basis of anything other than facts, which would be recorded, impartial facts. Figuring out who you would vote for would be like studying an encyclopedia. It would be about that interesting. You would research facts about accomplishments, facts about their positions on things, facts about history, and you would form a decision about who you wanted to vote for based not on how they look, not on any exterior factors, not on the performance in some sort of a carnival-like debate. It would just be studying the position of their party or the position that they have published or the position they've demonstrated through their previous work, then you would vote based on a series of facts. First of all, I think a lot of people who want politics to be a form of entertainment would probably just drop off, because there's people who want to go get a flag that represents their political party or their favorite candidate, and they want to go out and talk to their friends about why the other side is stupid, or rally around the personality of both the person they're voting for and the crowd that aligns with it. So it's very much in that way like going to a ball game. And it's the same atmosphere. It's the same culture of just having a lot of fun, both rallying around your side and potentially trash talking the other side. Suppose the process of casting a vote was completely private and nobody cared how you cast your vote, and you wouldn't tell anyone and nobody would want to know. It would be a boring thing, kind of like if you got picked for jury duty. Nobody really cares what happened when you went to jury duty. You would just go and you do what you have to do because you're called on. And then nobody would find out. Like maybe not even your family. And even if they did, it would not be dinner table conversation. It's just something that you did to participate in the political process. How would people vote? They wouldn't vote because, well, my friends are voting this way, or I feel like socially I should be voting this particular way because that's what everyone wants. There wouldn't be any of that sense of, this is my tribe, this is how we're voting, so I'm going to vote the way the people in my church would vote, or the people in my family would vote, or my coworkers. There'd be none of that. It would just be, if you want to vote, you're going to have to study, and then you're going to cast your vote based off of measurable specific issues. If you didn't have any idea what these people look like, you didn't have any idea how your peers were going to cast their vote, and it was a purely unemotional experience, a lot of people wouldn't want to be part of it, because there wouldn't be any fun, there wouldn't be any entertainment, there wouldn't be any flag waving or jumping up and down. It would just be a simple, boring process that requires research and study. And I think if it was that way, a lot of people who did participate would start to drift a lot more toward the center. Because if you really had to do your research, you might find in some cases you'd want to vote more to the right, and in some cases you'd want to vote more to the left. It wouldn't necessarily be a case where people would always vote 100% down party lines. There'd be a lot more of ambiguous voting, where people would just kind of do what they feel is right based on their situation. And I think that would be healthier too. You know, maybe, I'm just thinking out loud, but maybe it would actually make more sense for the voting process to be a little bit more kind of like an electoral college of people who are voted as a subsample of the American population, but not the entire American population. Like if you think about it as it is, people who vote do not comprise the entire American population, because some people just don't vote at all. So to say that everyone participates and we have a true democracy is a little bit incorrect, because the vote really is determined by the people who actually cast a vote. So what if a lot of people just don't feel like it? Does that sway the outcome of an election? And I would say no doubt it does. But what if people were required to vote? And it was a completely random lottery, so there would be no favoritism there. But people who are selected would be required to vote. And, you know, that would be kind of interesting. I'm not saying that would be a good idea. I think in a perfect world where there's no opportunity for people to cheat or for corruption to happen, I think that could be an interesting idea, though. That's why jury duty is done that way, because the goal is for it to be very impartial. And the only way you can do that is if people don't really select themselves. They are selected in a very random sort of a way. But again, there is a lot of room for corruption, so that would probably not be a good solution in the real world in a democratic situation. But it is an interesting idea if you are just talking about the hypothetical of how people think, and how when you take out the fanfare of politics, if you could just make people actually vote on issues that they researched fully before they cast their vote, you'd get a very different result, probably from a lot of people. So I tend to be ecumenical when it comes to politics. I believe that as a citizen, I should have an opinion, I should have a perspective, I should have a position. And I also believe that other people should have positions which are probably different than mine. Because if you look at fascism, and I think this is relevant to talk about, because a lot of people talk about how when they don't like something that's happened in politics, they will compare a party or an individual to Nazism or to Hitler, and they'll say, oh my goodness, you know, you're pushing America toward fascism. And the truth is, that's not a really fair representation, because American politics doesn't have a lot of shared DNA with the Nazi Party in Germany nearly 100 years ago. They're just not similar. That's the truth. But there's a lot of value, I guess, in comparing people to Nazis, because it gets people fired up. That's it. The reality is American politics is a lot more centrist, or maybe even liberal, on both sides of the fence than it wants to acknowledge. In any case, when we talk about fascism, generally it's something, I want to say it's called the third position. The general idea is that you take the extreme right and you take the extreme left, you put the two together in a nationalist single party environment, and that's basically how you get fascism. It's a fusing of the private and the public sectors. That's not something that we have in the United States. But if you were going to create some sort of fascism, it probably wouldn't be as the result of the left or the right gaining dominance. It would be the result of some sort of an extreme figure that would rise up and unify both sides and become a voice for the extremes on both sides. And then that's how you'd create a single party state, which is extremist. And that would work only if you also consolidate big business with big government, so that you don't have a free market anymore. And that's really not, that's not our current election. That's pretty out there. But anyway, I say all this to say it's important for us to have a two-party system. It's important for us to have people who are debating different ideas, and to a point, within healthy reason, it's important for people to be at odds with each other when it comes to political opinions. It's like true neutral in Dungeons and Dragons alignment. True neutral could be not caring about anything, but it could also be not wanting the last buffalo to die. It could be understanding that there needs to be balance in any dialogue. And if you are at a point where one side is on the verge of being hunted to extinction, then you need to switch sides so that you can maintain a sort of a balance in the force. And I do believe that. I think that there's times probably in American politics when it would be a good idea to vote Democrat because the Republican Party is getting too powerful, it's getting too out of control. And then there's other times when it would be a good idea to vote Republican because the people on the left are getting too out of control, too powerful, and they're losing perspective. And that's probably unsettling to a lot of people because folks want to say, well, you have to pick a side. Well, yeah, but picking a side today doesn't necessarily mean that that's the same side that you would pick in the future or always. I think you have to look at these things on a case-by-case basis and say, what is the landscape of the country? What is the truth of the matter? And what do we need to do to maintain a fair, moderate, balanced approach to government? And the end result of this belief has to be that we aren't necessarily going to be upset if each of us reaches our own conclusion and takes a different position on whatever issues are being discussed. I do think it's important to also talk about how the issues that divide us in American politics are pretty trivial. And maybe that will infuriate some people because folks think, well, the issues are a big deal. And maybe they are important within a specific context. But are they really important more broadly? And the answer is no. It's like, let's say we're talking about gay marriage or something like that. Well, okay, that is relevant if you are gay and you want to get married. Let's talk about abortion. Well, who is that relevant to? It's relevant if you are interested in getting an abortion, right? But if you're the average person, that's not a daily thing that affects your everyday life. That's kind of a niche issue. So if we're talking about things like what bathroom can we go into, well, that's not a main thing that's affecting a lot of people day to day. What affects people day to day is the cost of gas. It's whether they feel like they can find affordable housing. It's all of those kinds of things which determine whether people feel like they have a good quality of life in their country. And those are issues which could be served well by both sides of the aisle. There's reasons why a Republican perspective is better than a Democratic one in some cases, and there's also reason why Democratic perspective is superior. Because if you really go down the road of being a rugged individualist, well, that's great. Like, we probably don't want extremely high tax rates. We want to be able to pursue our own destiny, but then we also would benefit from having social safety nets too. You don't want to have a world that's all one or all the other, where everyone is just fight for your own self, and if you fall and don't have the power to pick yourself up, then you just die. Nor do we want to pivot toward some sort of a new communism either. So, I guess all things considered, I'll pivot a little bit more toward my thoughts on the current election and the current landscape. And from my perspective, I think I used to vote more Democratic, and now I vote generally more Republican. And a lot of that is life experience. I think when you're younger, you're more inclined to vote liberal because you think to yourself, well, I don't really have anything, and I would like to be given something, an opportunity to get ahead in life. And so you think maybe a more Democratic ticket would help with that. Then as you get older, you start to have more things, you've accomplished more things, and then you start to think, well, maybe something more like, well, I don't want to pay too high of taxes or something like that. The thought of excessive handouts is less appealing when you are realizing that the handouts are going to be probably coming out of your pocket versus being on the receiving side of them. But that notwithstanding, I think it was 5 years ago, I moved to Montana from Washington. And the truth is, my life is a lot better today than it was under then President Trump. In terms of my overall financial situation and my quality of life and things like that, I'm a lot better off. The truth, though, is I really couldn't attribute that to who's in office in Washington, D.C. It's just not. Yes, my life got better over the last 4 years, but I'm not going to be able to honestly say that it was somehow Joe Biden's policies that made my life better. It was changes I made in my life, changes which I could have made in my life regardless of who is in the White House. So you can't necessarily look at your own life and say, well, am I better off or worse off under this president than the last one? Because many times it's just circumstances that happen in your life. And I do think a lot of people wind up making that mistake of thinking, well, I'm going to look at how I feel about life, and then I'm going to assume that the presidential candidate is responsible for either making it better or making it worse. The reality is, if your life is messed up today, it's probably going to be messed up later on, regardless of who wins the election. No one's going to just win and then suddenly your life is going to be good if you aren't in a good place. Like that's 90% on you, and then there's that extra 10%, which is sort of maybe determined to a point by the political environment that you live in. So in terms of what I've actually seen, I used to live in Seattle. Well, not Seattle, but Tacoma, Washington, and that was close to Seattle. And I used to like going to Seattle. I'd go down there, hang out, walk around downtown, walk along the waterfront, all that kind of stuff. And I went back there a couple months ago for something, and it's a really interesting contrast just to see the change between what it was before and what it is today. Most of the retail is gone. There's a visible increase in the amount of crime in the streets and homelessness that's just everywhere. So despite the fact I normally feel pretty safe in those environments, I was finding myself saying, I guess I'll have to go back to my hotel when the sun goes down, because this isn't the kind of a place where you'd go out and be on the street after dark. And to see the huge decline in the amount of retail and just the overall atmosphere of the city is disappointing, because Seattle used to be a really beautiful city that I thought was a fun place to be, but not anymore. I look at my experiences of living in Montana for 4 years, 5 years, somewhere in that neighborhood now, and I think about things that have been simpler, like the fact that we really don't have a lot of problems with political unrest or anything like that in Montana. We don't really have the sense that you can't go outside because it's not safe. There's other things that I just enjoy about the state, like the fact that there's no sales tax, or when I go to get tabs on my car, if the car is more than 15 years old, I get a permanent plate on there and I don't have to ever buy tabs again. Washington State, you have to go get emissions tests and all sorts of things. And, you know, it's just those little things you start to notice, like what a difference that is. Buying a permanent plate for $150 and never having to buy another one, and never having to buy any tabs or get any emissions tests or anything for the life of the vehicle, versus having to pay a couple $100 every single year just in order to drive your car. Like simple things like that I've enjoyed in Montana. I appreciate the sense of individualism that you have in the state of Montana, that people really have a lot more of a sense that you should mind your own business and respect other people. Whether you agree with them or not, you should respect the boundaries other people have, and don't try to just meddle in everybody's business. And I think in more liberal environments, there tends to be that sense that everyone should be a collective, and that can be a bit obnoxious. So I've appreciated that. And my perception has been that over the last few years, we have seen the United States struggle with a lot of optics surrounding its projection of power around the world. We've had the Ukraine conflict, we've had the Israel conflict, we had the ultimately embarrassing withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan. Like, no matter who you are, no matter what side of the fence you stand on, there's nothing good about seeing a military transport aircraft taking off with desperate Afghani people clinging to the plane itself while it plows through a crowd to take off. Like, that kind of thing is just, that's ridiculous. That's not how American power should be projected in any situation. So to look at what's happened over the last few years, it's very hard to look at the Biden-Harris administration and say that the way America has been governed has been excellent. I don't think anyone can really believe that. It's just not the truth. Maybe you could make a case for the last 4 years being mediocre, if you wanna play devil's advocate. But ultimately, it feels like the last 4 years in American politics have been more of a fumble than anything else. Things like the fact that as soon as Joe Biden got into office, we saw the pipeline from Canada down into the central United States get shut down. Keystone XL pipeline, I think it is. In any case, a major oil transport pipeline gets just shut down. Like, why would you do that? That does not seem like a good idea if you're trying to invest in the American economy. Then there was the entire issue surrounding vaccine mandates during COVID. And I understand people make all sorts of decisions when they're in a rough situation and they're trying to do what they feel is best. Sometimes good people make poor decisions, and so that's fair. But the reality is, when the COVID vaccine came out, there were a lot of rumors surrounding whether it was safe or not. And as time went on, those rumors just continued to grow. But instead of encouraging people to make their own decisions and transparently providing the facts and then letting people make up their own mind, we saw a lot of people, generally on the left, trying to force the issue by telling people that they would lose their jobs if they didn't get the vaccine, or threatening people by saying that they weren't patriotic Americans if they didn't get it. And I thought that was a really, really terrible thing, because when you start telling people that they have to put blinders on and not consider what they feel to be an issue of their own personal health and safety because you want to make a spectacle out of them for political purposes, that's a very bad look. And I'll just leave that there. But it definitely was an eye-opening moment, which made me realize that despite the fact that liberals have traditionally endorsed individual freedom and autonomy to maybe to be different, in that particular case, it was a really good example of how when people believe that they're right, when people believe that they're the good guys, sometimes they will become abusive, because someone who thinks they can do no wrong will potentially do a big wrong, but they won't see it as a wrong because they think that they're on the right side of history. And if you believe you're on the right side of history and you're incapable of saying, well, maybe I could be doing something that is wrong, then at some point you're going to start getting toxic, you're going to start getting cruel and abusive, and you're going to do it in the name of the greater good. Just like an abusive relationship. You have somebody who maybe they started off being nice in some ways, but then they start thinking, well, I'm going to control my partner because I know what's best for them. And that's usually a death knell for the relationship, because when you start believing that you know what's best for someone else and they don't need to think for themselves because you're going to think for them and you're going to tell them what to do and you're going to treat them like property, you can't really have a true spirit of freedom or respect. So, in conclusion, what is the bottom line? Well, I think in terms of projecting American power, in terms of believing that smaller government is usually better than large overextension, overreach of government, my general position is more conservative than liberal. So I cast my vote for the Republicans. But I do so with reservations, because the truth is, I don't think either party represents a pragmatic liberalism, a progressive attitude that isn't too sure that it's right. I think there's a lot of chest thumping on both sides of the aisle. And I think this election, Americans are given the inconvenient duty of choosing between the lesser of two evils. Because when you compare Trump and Kamala Harris to Ronald Reagan and John F. Kennedy, there really is no comparison. You can't look at the American politics of today and say that anyone on either side is oozing greatness, eloquence, or commanding respect. I think that that's unfortunate. And so maybe the only thing we can do is conclude that no matter where we choose to stand, we should be part of the political process, because there are people who live in places in the world where there is no illusion of democracy, where there is no general attainment of personal liberty. And we do have those things here in the United States. for the greater part. So we should participate, but we should also understand, going back to that text-based adventure analogy, there's more that unites us than divides us. There's more things that are ambiguous than there are things which are purely black and white. And despite disagreeing on a few things, most of us as Americans agree on the big rocks, the things that we really care about in life, the opportunity to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. I don't think that there's Democrats or Republicans who think that our country would be made better by not securing the opportunity for all Americans to improve their lives. We may disagree on how, but that doesn't mean that we disagree on everything. And if we took all of the fanfare, all of the circus and carnival acts out of the equation, we'd probably realize that there really isn't a lot that actually divides us. And if we realized that, I think we'd be a lot more capable to have educated discussions. Finally, I think it's important to mention the fact that social media, the spreading of memes, the speed at which information can be shared is a growing problem, because it encourages us now more than ever to make a decision based off of an incomplete set of data. Instead of going to the library and reading a history book or an encyclopedia, we Google it. And in a few seconds, we get an answer that aligns with what we were searching for. And while it's great to be able to get information quickly, it's also a risk, because we don't get a well-rounded, informed opinion. So as we consider where we stand on issues, we probably should make a point to try to research our positions in a more well-rounded way, and also be open to the possibility that the positions we hold today may not necessarily be the positions we hold in the future. After all, Ronald Reagan himself, who is viewed today as one of the greatest Republican candidates of all time, actually started his career as a Democrat. So, wherever you stand, don't get too fired up about politics, but be involved. And good luck. Probably last thing, no matter what anybody says, we do live in the best, most amazing time in history. To be able to see all the things we've seen, to experience the things we experience in the world and society, in technology, is absolutely incredible. So don't let cynical people make you believe that life is bad, because it really isn't. Life is good. So, as it's been said, life has loveliness to sell. Buy it, and never count the cost. Thanks for watching.